Look at this 5-gallon plastic bucket. To most people, it's construction debris or a place to store car wash supplies, but inside these white walls, a biological heist is taking place. While your neighbor's traditional garden is struggling against the unpredictable temperament of the earth, this bucket is quietly shattering the laws of botanical physics. We've been told for 10,000 years that the soil is the source of life, the ultimate foundation for every calorie we consume. But what if I told you the soil is actually a bottleneck? What if the very thing we think feeds plants is actually slowing them down? Imagine a plant that never has to search for a meal. In a standard backyard garden, a tomato plant spends nearly 40% of its energy sending roots out into the dark, cold dirt, desperately hunting for microscopic pockets of nitrogen and phosphorus. It's an exhaustive caloric tax that limits how much fruit that plant can actually produce. But here, where it gets interesting. Inside this bucket, we remove the search. We replace the dirt with an inert, airy medium, usually a mix of perlite and coconut husk, and we flood it with a precision-engineered nutrient solution. This isn't just watering the plant, it's a direct intravenous feed to the root system. When you eliminate the need for a massive root architecture, that redirected energy has only one place to go: upward. The result is a growth rate that looks like time-lapse photography in real life. We aren't just growing food, we are hacking the plant's internal economy. But why haven't you heard of this? Why are we still tilling the earth like it's the Middle Ages? The answer isn't a conspiracy, it's a matter of infrastructure. Large-scale agriculture is built on the back of heavy machinery and vast acreage. You can't run a combine harvester through a field of plastic buckets. Our entire food system is optimized for the soil, even if the soil isn't the most efficient way to grow. I remember the first time I saw this in action. A friend of mine, a guy named Marcus who lived in a cramped apartment with a tiny concrete balcony, showed me a pepper plant he'd started in a bucket. It was 3 feet tall and sagging under the weight of 30 habaneros. Meanwhile, my garden in the backyard was producing stunted, yellowing leaves because it had rained too much the week before. That was the realization: soil is a gamble, the bucket is a laboratory. To build this, you don't need a degree in chemistry, but you do need to understand the Kratky method or the Dutch bucket principle. It starts with a simple bypass of the Earth's unpredictability. You take a standard bucket, drill a hole for a small net pot, and fill it with your medium. This medium doesn't provide food, it provides a home for the roots to breathe. In soil, roots often suffocate. If you water too much, the air pockets are filled with liquid, and the plant literally drowns. If you water too little, the roots shrivel. It's a constant balancing act that most hobbyists lose. Inside the bucket, we solve this with a simple air gap. As the plant drinks the nutrient water, the water level drops, exposing the upper roots to the air. These become specialized air roots, pulling oxygen directly from the atmosphere, while the lower roots continue to drink. It's a dual-engine system: oxygen from the top, minerals from the bottom, and this changes everything. Let's look at the numbers, because the math is where the skepticism usually dies. In a side-by-side trial, a lettuce head grown in soil takes roughly 60 to 70 days to reach harvestable size. In a high-efficiency bucket system, you're looking at 35 days. You are effectively doubling the number of growing seasons you have in a single year. That's not the full story, though. Because the system is contained, you use 90% less water than a traditional garden. In a world where water is becoming a luxury, that's not just a neat trick, it's a survival strategy. In a traditional garden, most of the water you pour onto the dirt simply evaporates or leaches deep into the ground where the plant can't reach it. In the bucket, the water has nowhere to go but up the stem. So how do you actually start? You need the big three: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, but in a water-soluble form. You can't just throw a handful of dirt fertilizer into the water and hope for the best. It will settle at the bottom and rot. You need a hydroponic-specific blend that stays suspended in the liquid. The growth timeline is where the shock sets in. Week 1, the seedling looks standard. Week 2, the root explosion begins. Week 3, the vegetative growth is so aggressive you can almost see the leaves expanding hour by hour. By the time a soil-based plant is just starting to find its footing, the bucket-grown plant is already preparing to flower. It feels like cheating. It feels like you found a glitch in the simulation of nature. But here is the catch, the silent trade-off. In a soil garden, the earth acts as a buffer. If you mess up and forget to water for a day, the soil holds onto moisture. It forgives you. The bucket is a high-performance machine, and like all machines, it requires a pilot. If the bucket runs dry or the pH of the water shifts too far into the acidic range, the plant has no backup. It lives fast, but it can die fast too. Yet once you see the harvest, you realize the risk is worth the reward. When you pull that plant out at the end of the season, you won't see a massive, tangled mess of dirty roots. You'll see a clean, white curtain of fiber that looks like it belongs in a medical lab. And the taste, there's a myth that hydro food tastes like water. That's only true if the grower was lazy. If you provide the full spectrum of trace minerals, magnesium, calcium, sulfur, the fruit is often more intense than soil-grown produce because the plant was never stressed. It never had to fight for its life, so it spent all its time creating sugars and aromatic compounds. We are standing at a strange crossroads in history. We have more access to information than ever before, yet we are more disconnected from our food sources than at any point in human existence. We rely on global supply chains that span thousands of miles just to put a salad on the table. This bucket system isn't just about growing a faster tomato. It's about decentralizing the most basic human need. It's about the fact that a person with a balcony and a 5-gallon plastic container has more productive power than a farmer with an acre of depleted land a century ago. The hidden truth isn't that the soil is bad. It's that we've finally learned how to give plants exactly what they want without the interference of the Earth's limitations. We've cracked the code of botanical efficiency. When you look at that bucket now, you shouldn't see a piece of plastic. You should see a self-contained life support system that defies the seasons. The only question left is why you're still waiting for the rain. If you're wondering which specific nutrient ratios actually trigger that week 3 root explosion, there's a specific chemical balance that most beginners get wrong. The bottleneck of traditional gardening isn't just the dirt, it's the lack of control. In the soil, you are a spectator. In the bucket, you are the architect. But to move from a hobbyist to a master, you have to understand the invisible chemistry happening just below the surface. Most people assume that more is better when it comes to nutrients. They see the rapid growth and think, if I double the dose, I'll double the speed. But that's where the system breaks. Plants operate on a law of the minimum. They are only as fast as their most scarce resource. If you oversaturate the water, you create osmotic shock essentially. The salts in the water become so concentrated that they actually suck the moisture out of the plant's roots. This is the silent kill. Your plant looks lush one day, and the next, the edges of the leaves are crisp and brown, even though the bucket is full of water. It's a paradox. The plant is dying of thirst while sitting in a pool of liquid. But here, where it gets interesting. To prevent this, you need to master the 2 gatekeepers of the bucket system: pH and AC, electrical conductivity. Think of pH as the key that unlocks the nutrients. If your water is too alkaline, the plant literally cannot see the iron or manganese in the water, no matter how much you add. It's like being at a buffet with your hands tied behind your back. By keeping the pH between 5.5 and 6.5, you ensure every door to the root system is wide open. Once you dial in the chemistry, the growth timeline doesn't just speed up, it becomes predictable. You can actually schedule your harvests with the precision of a factory. In the soil, a cold snap or a week of heavy clouds can push your harvest back by 20 days. In the bucket, because the water temperature stays more stable than the topsoil, the plant's metabolism stays in high gear. And this changes everything for the average person. Most of us have been conditioned to believe that fresh food is something that comes from a store or a distant farm. We've accepted that a tomato should travel 1,500 miles before it hits our plate. But when you realize that a single corner of your garage can produce 50 pounds of produce a year using nothing but light and a few buckets, the hidden truth becomes clear. Our dependence on the industrial food chain is a choice, not a necessity. That's not the full story, though. The real realization comes during the harvest. When you pull a bucket-grown head of lettuce, it doesn't just look different, it feels different. It's turgid, crisp, and heavy with mineral-rich water. There's no grit to wash away, no parasites to worry about, and no pesticides required because the system is elevated and contained. You are eating the purest expression of that plant's genetics. We often think of technology as something that pulls us away from nature. We think of screens, silicon, and steel. But the bucket system is a different kind of technology. It's an alliance. It's using our understanding of fluid dynamics and chemistry to let nature do what it has always wanted to do: grow without limits. The system is a mirror. It shows us that when you remove the friction, when you remove the struggle for basic resources, life doesn't just survive. It thrives at a pace we previously thought impossible. As you look at your first harvest, you'll likely feel a strange sense of clarity. You'll realize that the limitations of your backyard weren't limitations of the earth, but limitations of the method. The power to feed yourself isn't buried in the ground, it's waiting in the air and the water. The only remaining mystery is why we ever let the dirt hold us back in the first place. If you're ready to see the specific blueprint for the air gap lid design that prevents root rot during heat waves, there's one structural tweak that most commercial systems actually try to hide. What's the one crop you've always struggled to grow in the ground? The struggle usually starts with the heavy hitters: tomatoes that split, peppers that refuse to ripen, or cucumbers that succumb to powdery mildew before the first pick. In a traditional garden, these failures are often blamed on the weather or bad luck, but the bucket reveals a different culprit: the soil's inability to breathe. When you move these high-demand crops into a bucket, you aren't just changing the container, you are changing the atmosphere. In the earth, oxygen levels drop significantly just a few inches below the surface. For a heavy feeder like a beefsteak tomato, this is like trying to run a marathon while breathing through a straw. But inside the bucket, we use a pattern interrupt for the roots. By utilizing a simple air stone or a recirculating flow, we saturate the water with dissolved oxygen. But here, where it gets interesting. When roots are bathed in high oxygen water, they undergo a morphological change. They become fuzzy with tiny root hairs that increase their surface area by 1,000-fold. This isn't just growth, it's an architectural upgrade. This allows the plant to drink and breathe simultaneously, a feat that is physically impossible in the compressed, heavy world of backyard dirt. And this changes everything about the growth timeline. In a soil garden, you spend the first month just hoping the seedling survives the transplant shock. In the bucket, there is no shock. The plant transitions from its starter plug into the bucket system with zero downtime. By week 4, while a soil gardener is still weeding and mulching, the bucket gardener is already pruning the first suckers off a plant that is twice the size of its dirt-bound siblings. That's not the full story, though. The most profound realization happens in the middle of summer. When the heat hits 95 degrees F, soil-grown plants go into survival mode. They wilt to protect themselves, shutting down photosynthesis to conserve moisture. But because the bucket acts as a thermal mass, the root zone stays significantly cooler than the ambient air. The plant doesn't wilt, it keeps working. It's like giving your garden a central air conditioning system. But why isn't every backyard filled with these white plastic towers? The structural reason is a lack of biological literacy. We've been taught that gardening is a manual labor task: digging, hoeing, hauling. We haven't been taught that it's a fluid dynamics task. The barrier isn't cost. A DIY bucket setup costs less than a single bag of premium organic potting soil. The barrier is the shift in perspective. We've been conditioned to think that the more we sweat, the better the food must be. The bucket proves that intelligence is more productive than sweat. As you reach the end of the season, the harvest phase becomes an exercise in disbelief. You'll find yourself weighing tomatoes that are perfect spheres, untouched by the soil-borne pathogens that usually turn the bottom of the fruit into a rotted mess. You'll realize that the earthy taste we associate with vegetables is often just the taste of stress. A bucket-grown pepper, fed a clean diet of minerals, has a floral, crisp intensity that most people haven't experienced since childhood, if ever. This system is a bridge to a different kind of future. It's a future where your farm is 5 feet from your kitchen door, regardless of whether you have a backyard or a fire escape. It's a validation of the idea that we don't need to conquer nature to flourish, we just need to understand its levers. The bucket is a silent revolution. It's proof that the fastest way to grow isn't to work harder, but to remove the obstacles. Once you see the white roots of a bucket-grown plant, the dark mystery of the soil loses its grip. The only question left is what you'll do with all the time you used to spend weeding. If you're curious about which specific mineral addition prevents the bitter taste in fast-grown greens, there is one trace element that acts as a natural sweetener for the plant cells. What is the biggest obstacle stopping you from starting your first bucket today? The biggest obstacle for most isn't the cost or the chemistry, it's the belief that natural must mean difficult. We have been culturally conditioned to equate a green thumb with dirty fingernails, but the bucket system proves that the most natural thing a plant can do is grow at its genetic limit when the friction of the earth is removed. But here, where it gets interesting. The final hidden truth of the bucket system isn't just the speed, it's the immunity. In a traditional garden, the soil is a reservoir for more than just nutrients, it's a highway for pests and fungi. Verticillium wilt, fusarium and nematodes are all earthbound enemies. By elevating the root zone into a sterile, controlled environment, you aren't just growing faster, you're growing safer. You are creating a biological fortress where the only thing that enters is what you permit. That's not the full story, though. The true realization comes when you stop looking at the bucket as a system and start seeing it as a liberation. Most people feel tethered to their homes during the growing season, worried that a single dry weekend will incinerate their hard work. But a 5-gallon reservoir is a massive battery of life. It provides a buffer of time and resources that the thin layer of topsoil simply can't match. You aren't just a gardener anymore, you are a manager of an automated biological engine. And this changes everything. The contrast between the old way and this new reality is starkest at the moment of harvest. In soil, you often pull the plant and see a struggle, twisted roots, scarred stems, and the exhaustion of a season spent fighting the elements. In the bucket, you lift the lid to find a pristine, snowy white root mass that looks as vibrant as the day it was born. The plant didn't just survive the summer, it conquered it. We are entering an era where the hidden truths of agriculture are being handed back to the individual. The industrial food system relies on the fact that most people find growing food too hard, too slow, or too messy to do themselves. The bucket system deletes all three of those excuses. It's not just a faster way to grow a salad, it's a reclamation of autonomy. The science is simple, the logic is sound, and the results are undeniable. We've moved from the uncertainty of the wild to the precision of the laboratory, all inside a piece of plastic that usually ends up in a landfill. It turns out that the secret to feeding the future wasn't hidden in a new pesticide or a massive tractor, it was hidden in the air, the water, and our willingness to rethink the dirt beneath our feet. The bucket is a mirror reflecting a simple choice. Do you want to garden like it's 10,000 years ago, or do you want to grow like you finally understood the code? The only mystery left is how much of your own potential is still buried in the soil, waiting for the right environment to finally break through. If you're wondering how to transition your current soil-bound plants into this system without killing them, there is a specific washing technique that clears the path for new root growth. Which part of this system feels the most too good to be true to you right now? The skepticism you feel right now is the final barrier between a traditional garden and a high-velocity harvest. It feels counterintuitive that a plastic container and a few gallons of water could outperform a landscape honed by eons of evolution, but the results speak in a language that is hard to ignore: pounds, inches, and days. But here, where it gets interesting. The most profound shift doesn't happen in the bucket, it happens in your mind. Once you see a plant reach its full genetic potential in half the usual time, you realize how much of our common knowledge about nature is actually just an acceptance of inefficiency. We've mistaken the struggle of the soil for the necessity of the plant. By providing the perfect environment, you aren't fighting nature, you are finally letting it off the leash. That's not the full story, though. The real victory is the realization that you are no longer a victim of your local geography. It doesn't matter if your backyard is clay, sand, or concrete. It doesn't matter if you have an acre or a balcony. The bucket system is a universal equalizer. It's a hidden truth that has been sitting in plain sight, waiting for us to stop digging and start designing. And this changes everything. We started with a simple 5-gallon bucket, a piece of construction debris that most people overlook. But by understanding the science of the root zone, the logic of nutrient delivery, and the power of oxygen, we've turned that debris into a miracle. We've moved from a world of maybe to a world of exactly. The harvest isn't just food, it's proof that when we align our intelligence with biology, the limits we thought were permanent simply evaporate. The bucket isn't just a faster way to grow, it's a more certain way to live. The era of the unpredictable garden is over. Now, the only variable left in the equation is your willingness to start. The dirt has held the secret for 10,000 years, but the water is finally ready to tell it. If you're ready to see the exact mineral formula that turns a standard bucket into a professional-grade production line, there is one final ratio that separates the hobbyists from the masters. Which crop will be the first to fill your bucket this season?